Are we heading for trouble in paradise? Because Vance is not going to be a lackey. He has his own ideas, his own thoughts about what are right and wrong. We've seen him push back against Trump in the future. Trump also doesn't like being upstaged. So I wonder if there are the seeds of future instability, volatility, and dissension in this pick. But here now on July 19th, this looks to me like Trump saying, I've got this in the bag. Let me just pick the guy that I feel the best about, and let's throw out the rest of it.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Fowler, the CEO and co-founder of International Intrigue, a former diplomat in Beijing and Shanghai. With me again this week, as always, is Jacob Shapiro. He's the director of Geopolitical Analysis at Cognitive Investments. It's been a big week for Donald Trump, Jacob. He escaped death last Saturday evening. 4 days of primetime televised convention for him, culminating in a speech that he made last night, one of the longest in American history, apparently, to accept his party's nomination for president. So it's going to be a big week of conversation, Jacob, and make sure that everyone should stick around at the end because we'll discuss about Elon Musk and his promise to donate a ton of money to Trump over the next couple of months. But Jacob, we're a geopolitics-focused show, and there's still a ton, I think, to talk about around the Republicans, what's going on this week politically in the US. Where do you want to start?
Well, first, Mr. Former Diplomat in Beijing and Shanghai, I feel like I need to be a former diplomat to somewhere. I'll have to come up with something catchy next time because I'm on my flat foot here. But let's just start with what happened and talk about the assassination itself. So as most people know, but let's just rehash it. Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt while giving a speech at a rally near Butler, Pennsylvania. The shooter is Thomas Matthew Crooks. He's a 20-year-old man from Bethel Park who had an AR-15. He was firing from a roof about 400 meters from the stage. It looks like he was a lone wolf and probably mentally not the healthiest in the world. He registered Republican, donated to a Democratic PAC or something like that. I mean, doesn't look like a politically motivated assassination. One audience member was killed and two were injured. I think that's gone unfocused on in the context of everything else. And Crooks was eventually shot and killed by the U.S. Secret Service. I myself, John, I went quiet for a couple of days after the assassination because I was having trouble reaching that enlightened plane of objectivity. My emotions were too much in it. But I feel like I've gotten there a little bit now. And before I turn it over to you to give your take, I just want to say that this is not that exceptional in U.S. history. There have been 45 American presidents. 4 of them were killed in office. That's 8.8% of them. If you go down and look at attempts on presidents' lives, and I mean serious attempts, I got a 15.5% number. Herbert Hoover was targeted by Argentine anarchists when he was visiting Chile and Argentina. William Howard Taft was targeted when he was in Texas with Porfirio Diaz. Harry Truman was targeted by pro-Puerto Rican independence folks who actually invaded Blair House and killed a couple of police officers and Secret Service guys trying to get to Truman and didn't succeed. And that's before we get to candidates like Huey Long or Bobby Kennedy. So political violence, unfortunately, is a part of the tapestry of American history. And I don't want to say that this is not unimportant. I think there are some huge implications here. But I do think that we've gone off the rails in thinking that this is somehow exceptional and that somehow the entire world is upside down. So maybe I'll transition it to you, John, to say, tell me why all of that sober, rational analysis we should throw out the window and why we should be treating this like the red alert that it absolutely is.
Well, I think the simple answer to that is just you haven't had any of those historical moments broadcast almost live on TV, instantaneous kind of beaming around the world on the internet where people were kind of figuring out what the hell happened in real time along with the anchors and the analysts. So I think that is different. It's different to kind of waking up 2 days later and reading it on the front page of, the Colombo Times or something on the other side of the world. And the second thing is, I guess, the Secret Service. These things become far less likely when you can't kind of shake hands with presidents and walk up to them and have a chat, like you still can in much of the world, right? Like our prime minister in Australia is far more accessible to the public, whereas the US kind of cordon off your political leaders far more thoroughly, which I guess is one of the big takeaways from this is the Secret Service kind of fallout. But that's probably not super relevant to us. I think you touched on something very interesting there, which is this isn't unusual. And I would even go further and say, because this wasn't, a structured attempt on the life of a political leader by a foreign nation or by his political enemies per se, or anything kind of more sinister than a story we already know in America, which is mental health is a crisis, particularly in young males. Access to deadly weapons, particularly AR-15s and these kinds of automatic and semi-automatic weapons is a problem. And I'm not sure, perhaps you could extend that argument to say there's the political tone, the rhetoric, the words that are used on both sides about kind of beating and winning and destroying the enemy and owning people. Perhaps you could draw a bow and say that's a problem here. But realistically, Trump didn't die. So it kind of, I don't see that it changes much in reality. Now, of course, the narratives and the stories we tell ourselves about what happened on Saturday night will change a lot of what happens over the next 5 months.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll just say is I think the thing that this does more than anything else, like you said, it shapes the narrative. And there's a reason everybody thinks that Trump is the odds-on favorite right now. I think this inoculates Trump from arguably one of his biggest weaknesses. I mean, one of them is abortion and that whole issue, but the other is January 6th. And he has gone from being sort of tangentially related to January 6th to now being the guy who got shot in the ear and came up raising a fist, saying fight, and standing for American democracy. It gives him gravitas that he didn't have before the attempt.
So big Saturday night for Donald Trump. He flew out to Milwaukee on Monday and announced his running mate for vice president, JD Vance. Probably, if you're terminally online as Jacob and I are, you already know who JD Vance is. But for those who don't, he is a former tech bro, a Silicon Valley tech investor. He worked with fairly famous or infamous figures, Peter Thiel and some others out there, these kind of libertarian wing of Silicon Valley. He wrote the bestseller Hillbilly Elegy, which is a story, a memoir of his life growing up in a small town in rural Ohio. And he's 39 years old, which I think is notable. He's young, very young. He was a senator for 2 years before being elevated to the vice presidential pick. Trump did a good job of his reality TV chops of teasing the choice, keeping everyone on tenterhooks before he announced it. What did you make of the choice? Do you think it's a good choice? Anything to say about JD Vance that hasn't been kind of said about his growing up in the hill country of Southern Ohio?
I only wish that they had gotten all the potential candidates around a table with Trump and he was going to read their strengths and weaknesses and then go, "You're hired." Or maybe he should have done, "You're fired" to the rest of them. I don't know. As you could tell, I've been reading a lot of history this week to try and stay sober. And I think there's a really interesting analog between this Trump-Vance ticket and between the William McKinley, Teddy Roosevelt ticket. In 1896. And McKinley was taken down in an assassination, and Teddy Roosevelt becomes the youngest president in U.S. history at the age of 42 and pushes through ideas that eventually became known as the progressive movement, the Square Deal. And before that, McKinley was somebody who supported tariffs and American protectionism, supported American imperialism, the Spanish-American War, takeover of Cuba, the Philippines, things like that, puts the U.S. on the gold standard officially. It had been for a couple decades informally, but he's the one who puts it on. So I think there's some interesting overtones there between that administration and between the one that Trump is trying to pick. Vance is an ideologue. And he's a charismatic ideologue at that. He's a card-carrying member who actually believes in this stuff. Now, that said, 8 years ago, he was leading the Never Trump camp. So he's a flexible ideologue. He seems to be able to move from one position to another. By the way, I'm cool with people changing their minds, but it is stark to see a politician who has come so far as Vance has, from going to Never Trump to pro-Trump. But I think the broader thing here that it shows me is hubris on the part of the Trump campaign. I think even 5-6 weeks ago, they were thinking about a middle of the road candidate who could reassure people in the Midwest, like a Doug Burgum from North Dakota or someone like that. And instead they're like, no, let's anoint the heir apparent. Let's get the charismatic guy and go for it, because we think we've got this election in the bag. Certainly here today on July 19th, that's what it looks like. But hubris is a dangerous thing. And I wonder if they aren't getting a little bit too far ahead of themselves. And I also wonder, are we heading for trouble in paradise? Because Vance is not going to be a lackey. He has his own ideas, his own thoughts about what are right and wrong. We've seen him push back against Trump in the future. Trump also doesn't like being upstaged. So I wonder if there are the seeds of future instability, volatility, and dissension in this pick. But here now on July 19th, this looks to me like Trump saying, I've got this in the bag. Let me just pick the guy that I feel the best about, and let's throw out the rest of it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We know that one of the most important qualifications in a vice president for Trump is how he feels about the person, the charisma, and they clearly have that. They get along. I actually think the relationship will work pretty well if they're elected. I think this pick tells me that Trump is aware that he's only got 4 more years. I don't think he has any interest or any belief that he could do that job for another 4 years after that. And I say that because there was those arguments that they were going to argue that the Constitution says 2 consecutive terms or the term limits. But I think you're exactly right. This was the seeding of the MAGA, America First, more isolationist Republican viewpoint now into the next generation to make sure the movement outlives Trump. So I think JD Vance understands that, and I think he'll do a really good job of. He's smart, and I think he'll do a good job of kind of not stepping on Trump's toes, not getting in front of Trump on some of the things that Trump is perhaps more mercurial about, and probably sticking to things like tech, which I don't think Trump has a deep understanding of. He doesn't care about the details of regulation. Vance is, I've spent this week for my sins kind of deep diving on Vance's podcast appearances and his speeches at various conferences. He's eloquent. He's smart. He understands this stuff. He's not an idiot. And I think if he can kind of come to an arrangement with Trump about, hey, I do tech regulation, I do these kinds of things, these are my areas, I'll check with you first, I think it could work. More broadly, I think he's an interesting character because he clearly has very forceful, he's an ideologue, he has forceful foreign policy views, which basically amount to pick your battles. Let's get out of everything except for China. China's the big battle. And I think his foreign policy is all downstream of what he sees as America's decline. It's hollowing out of, working class families in difficult areas where he grew up. At least that's the narrative that he has spun. And he blames China for that. It's a very easy package to sell to voters who may not understand the vagaries of foreign policy. He says, hey, we can bring back the days of respect and dignity to your communities in far-flung places in America, if only we can take it to China. And if we want to take it to China, we can't be sending our money to Ukraine. And that aligns with Trump. I think he's probably a more coherent advocate for that position than Trump is, but I don't see any major clashes. I think it's a smart pick, except for the fact I worry about his inexperience. If Trump does go crazy, or something happens to him, is JD Vance a credible guy to face down Xi Jinping in an invasion of Taiwan? Do you want that guy as president?
Well, I don't know, but I'll give you a pub trivia question. Do you know the only U.S. president to serve non-consecutive terms as president, John?
I feel like I do, but tell me.
Oh, well, feelings don't get you the points of pub trivia.
I'll have a go. Is it Teddy Roosevelt?
No, it's Grover Cleveland.
And for your same era.
Same era. For your sins, you've been reading and looking at JD Vance appearances. I've been reading this book, The Fourth Turning, for my sins. And here's what I think about it. Okay, great. Let's move on. Great segue to the next thing, which is, all right, we've talked a little bit about the Republicans. Let's talk about what the Democrats are going to do here. It was a great week for Trump, surviving the assassination attempt, got the classified documents case was thrown out, picked as vice president, crowning at the RNC. You couldn't really make up much of a worse state of conditions for Biden. On June 25th, 538 actually had Biden up 0.2 in national polls against Trump. Now Trump is up 3.2, so 43.3 to 40.1, and that's been a fairly friendly poll, I think, to Biden over the past couple of weeks. So those numbers are moving in the wrong direction. Not only that, Biden had really a non-reassuring interview with Lester Holmes, if you want to talk about that. He's come down with COVID. There are reports that Nancy Pelosi and all the Dems behind the scenes are telling him that he absolutely has to step down. And he is not only refusing to step down and saying he's going to stay with the course, he doesn't even seem to be willing to admit what everybody knows, which is cognitively he has declined. And it's that delusion and that grasp that scares me more than anything. John, what do you think the Dems are going to do here? I know we argued about this last week and we'll probably argue about it again here, but I wonder if you want to take an initial victory lap on your take last week.
Well, there's no victory lap yet. It hasn't happened. I remain convinced that he should step down, but that's my personal opinion. And I am a little surer this week that he will step down. I've had conversations with folks who are well sourced inside the Biden camp. Now, I don't suspect they're inside the inner Biden camp because I don't think many people are, but well sourced enough to have pretty senior advisors, and they say he's very seriously considering it this weekend, probably Sunday. Now, does that mean it's going to happen? No, I think what it is I believe that's a credible reflection of what those people want the world to think. And maybe they're doing that for bait and switch reasons. Maybe they want to give some sucker to Nancy Pelosi to pretend that they're, considering her requests very seriously. And then when he comes back on Sunday and says, no, I've decided to continue, it's more credible to continue. I don't know. But I do think that it's credible that he'll stand down. And listen, we know that the polls don't matter nationally. They matter in 5 or 6 states. Those polls have been really bad since the debate. They're probably tightening just because that's what they do. I also don't think you can over-index on polls too much. The donors are the problem for Biden. He's hemorrhaging the big donors. And, I think when you have Nancy Pelosi, who is, whatever you think of her politics, whatever you think of her as a person and her insider trading, double standards and all these kinds of things, she is a politician of the like and the ability and the talent that generational. She knows what she's doing. And it's pretty clear to me that she wants Biden to stand down, along with Chuck Schumer, along with Barack Obama. I don't see how he survives. I really don't. If he does, he will basically be running. They can't force him. He will basically be running unsupported, and they'll have to pretend after the convention that they support him. So that's my take.
Here's some free advice for the Democratic Party. If you want to win with Joe at the top of the ticket, I only see one path. Name Mitt Romney your vice presidential candidate. I think that's the only way that you can sail through here. You got to do that kind of thing. But John, before we leave this, I just wanted to ask you, let's say Biden does exits stage left. Does Kamala or anyone else have a chance against Trump at this point, in your opinion?
Yes, I do. I think Trump's popularity is massively overrated. I think a lot of people are they don't like either of them. I don't think the assassination will actually move undecideds one way or the other. Trump has a ceiling. We know this. He has a ceiling of whatever percent, 43, 44%. Those people will walk over hot, broken glass to vote for him. And I think the undecideds are disillusioned right now because they don't see Biden as able to do the job for 4 years, which I think is reasonable. Kamala, I think she's energetic. She's young. She could bring a lot of folks who are dissatisfied with the choices back into the fold, whether you like her or not. And if you have an open convention, I mean, I've been saying this from the start. Put aside legal problems, put aside planning and logistical problems. 4 nights of primetime television in which the world would be tuning in to unscripted, high-stakes reality TV in 2024, and at the end you get a nominee for president. I couldn't design a better way to rebalance this race, to restart it for the Democrats. I think they need to do it, but I don't think they will because they're not brave enough.
Yeah, it's the Bachelor approach to choosing a president.
Oh, exactly, and that's what we are. I mean, Trump's the other candidate, right? Jacob, let's kind of move back into the Republican sphere because it was the Republicans' week. They had the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. We had one of our reporters there. She said it was a hell of a lot of fun with a lot of crazy mixed in, which I think is probably right. A lot of energy. Milwaukee's a lovely city too. We also have Elon Musk and a bunch of pretty influential tech bros coming out saying they not only endorse President Trump, but they'll be donating a ton of money to him over the next couple of months to make sure he's elected. What does all of this mean? What does the Republican National Convention mean? What does the fact that Silicon Valley is getting behind him mean? What does the chaos mean? I don't know where to start pulling this apart, but why don't you have a go?
So this was probably already true, but I think we can say the nail is in the coffin. The old Republican Party is dead. MAGA has assimilated it. Resistance is futile. And I think that means some important things about policy implications going forward. Now, of course, a lot could change between now and the election, but the odds of Trump getting elected and of the Republicans taking both the House and the Senate is now, I think, the most likely scenario on the board. There are other scenarios on the board, but I think we need to sort of up it from a contingency scenario to we really need to start planning for this. And this is why I've been thinking very seriously about what does it mean, some of the policies that Trump and some of his advisors that are out there talking about potential policies, what is that going to mean? I'd remind folks who are watching us, Trump has talked about 10% tariffs on everything that comes into the United States from any country in the world. We could talk about whether that's legal or not or how he's going to do it, but that's what he said. He's also said 60% tariffs about everything coming into the country from China. No wonder Elon Musk, by the way, is excited about this. If I had 60% tariffs against my biggest international competitor, I'd probably be feeling about that too. But I don't think geopolitical risk analysis was included in the tariff schedule of the Section 302 Commerce Department investigations. Anyway, I digress. We have to think about what that means. Is that going to mean we're going to hit the roaring 20s era? Or are we going to take money out of American households and put it into the pocketbooks of businesses and they're going to start investing and it's just going to be off to the races until we all realize that fiscal deficits at some point will cause an end to the spending. But in the meantime, the 1920s and the 2020s will look pretty similar? Are we going to see a massive spike in inflation the day after Trump wins, followed by massive demand destruction on the other side, and maybe deflation because people are so scared about where they actually going to get products? A lot of the things that we use in our daily lives in the United States, they are made in China. I looked at this the other day. I went through every single toy and book that my 2-year-old uses. I found maybe 3 or 4 of them were made in France, or local wood carver made them somewhere else. Everything else is made in China, and that's true for just about everything across all the supply chains. There's also, you've got Lighthizer and some of these others out there telling newspapers they're thinking about ways to devalue the American dollar. Now, I love the advisors have been quoted. All the nuances and details haven't been worked out yet. Well, no shit, Sherlock. But that's what they're talking about. So are we talking about an attempt to go after a Plaza Accords 2.0? Are we going to trade things like Taiwan and like Ukraine for cooperation with China on a currency deal or something like that? There's a lot of interesting policy implications here that become way more realistic with the shift, not just in the presidential polling, but in the legislative polling too, which is pulling the Democrats down. So for me, that's the biggest story. You're going from what looked like a divided government to the most likely scenario being MAGA Republicans controlling the 3 branches they need to control the most, and probably controlling the courts too while we're at it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that it is the most likely scenario. I don't think it's probable. I'd put it in the sort of 50s percentages kind of thing. But I agree, it's the most likely. So you'd be negligent not to be thinking very carefully about how to prepare for it. What's interesting to me, I think, is the tech angle. Silicon Valley has been pretty pro-Democrat. It's obviously in San Francisco, which is part of California, which are both very progressive areas. But just generally, I think there was this understanding that if you were out there on the West Coast, if you worked in tech, you were a Democrat. And I heard Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz on a podcast this week, the founders of A16Z, a hugely influential Silicon Valley investor that has kind of built a lot of the internet infrastructure that we use every day, saying that in those days there was an unspoken agreement between the Democratic Party and Silicon Valley that we were building the future. Don't make us feel like we're problematic for getting wealthy. Let us donate money to charities and causes and all that kind of stuff. Don't come after us with taxes, wealth taxes, carried interest. Let us kind of build the future with all the perhaps fairly distasteful excesses that if you're successful, you can become worth whatever Elon Musk is worth. And we won't get into politics. We'll just keep kind of ticking the box for Democrat. They say that's changed. They say that Democrats have become economically populist and they want to tax success. Now, the cynical view of would just say, listen, you guys are finding it harder to make profits because we're not in zero interest rate environments anymore. You have big tech has kind of metastasized into the incumbent monopolistic behemoths that they are. And you guys only find value, particularly in the investing side and the startup side, you find value in disruption. So you need to kind of bring in a guy like Trump who is going to disrupt things, who is going to create the environment that you can exploit and continue to get wealthy. That's the cynical version. The perhaps more generous version is American productivity has almost entirely been fueled over the last 20 years by digital progress in Silicon Valley. Manufacturing's been hollowed out. We know all of this. Is that really going to change in the next 20 years? Does American prosperity actually rest on Silicon Valley continuing to do what it does? And if that's what it does hinge on, then maybe they're right. Maybe we can't afford to have a Democratic administration that would change the carried interest rules, make a lot of the models of investing in tech not viable, because that would be actually kneecapping America in a way that they say the Republicans are kneecapping America. I don't know. I think there's some interesting elements there about what's happening to the Republican Party right now, because on one hand, they want to build the future, and on the other hand, they want to put up the walls and run away from a globalized world. It feels contradictory to me, and it feels risk averse and unambitious. It's a strange time.
It's funny, John, as you were saying that last bit, a big crash of thunder sounded here in New Orleans. I don't know what that's saying about your position. It's actually probably telling me that climate change is coming to swallow my house at some point in the next couple of years. I just have a couple of points before we segue into the end, which is, you mentioned, the Silicon Valley thinking of the Democrats as economically populist. everybody on the table is economically populist right now.
Exactly.
There is no option for anything but economic populism, which is why my tongue-in-cheek recommendation to go after someone like a Mitt Romney, whether as a vice presidential candidate or announce that you want to name him to, director of commerce or something like that. Like that's the kind of move you want to make if you want to take that center, because I think it's there. Silicon Valley also, profited hugely from globalization. I think everybody knows about
Entirely.
the fact that, Taiwan is the semiconductor fab of the world. That's because of globalization. That's because a bunch of Taiwanese semiconductor engineers rubbed shoulders with folks in Silicon Valley in the 80s and 90s, learned how to do that stuff, realized they could make it cheaper in Taiwan than in the United States or Japan or everywhere else, and made Taiwan into that very hyper-focused, specialized thing in general. If you actually made all these things in the United States at cost, your iPhone might cost $10,000 or $25,000. Like the whole existence of these things is built on globalization in general. And I do think it's interesting to watch sort of the end of optimism for the tech overlords, because the internet was supposed to be the end of national politics. It was supposed to connect us all. China was the outlier behind their great firewall. Everybody else, we're going to be connecting more. We're going to be taking down national boundaries. It looks like China was the trendsetter. Russia's setting up its own internet. Different countries are talking about setting up their own infrastructure. And I think if you're a tech sort of overlord, you see the writing on the wall. You see that you took advantage of that globalization system before. It's going away. You're going to need U.S. government protection. And the thing is, you have more money and more lobbyists and more influence than American farmers and American manufacturers and all these others who would also profit from these things as well. So you can sort of be the front of the spear there. The last thing I'll just say here is that be careful who you bet on, because the thing about Trump I know for sure is the man is mercurial. He's volatile. He's unpredictable. A great example of this, and this is from my consulting sort of experience, towards the end of the Trump presidency, I believe it was the month before January 6th, Trump woke up one morning and was like, I think Vietnam is manipulating their currency. And we're going to throw Vietnam on a list of countries that are manipulating their currency. Do you know how many companies woke up that day and said, what the F? We were supposed to get out of China. We were looking for alternative options, and Vietnam was our option. I know that because I have a tech company that asked me those questions the day after he woke up on the wrong side of the bed, and we're asking those things. And that's what you get with Trump. You get some of the stuff that you expect, but you also get all kinds of things that you don't necessarily expect. And I think that chaos change agent thing, if tech is thinking that Donald Trump is going to carry them forward into some brave new world, yeah, he may for a while, but he's going to do things based on what he thinks, not just because you donated tens of $millions to his super PAC or anything else.
Well, I mean, that's right. TikTok was his biggest kind of target. And now I think it's very unlikely he'll ban TikTok if he gets elected, because his donors have has kind of said that's not something we want. And I last word, I think Silicon Valley's playing it smart. Instead of hiring hundreds of lobbyists to kind of influence around the margins, they've stuck one potentially in the Naval Observatory. So, yeah, it'll be interesting.
Let's wrap it up from there, John. And I want to take a step back and say I'm an American. So as much as I have tried to reach that enlightened plane of objectivity, it's my country. So you can. I'd be curious if people know which way I lean, one way or not. I always give that challenge when I give speaking events. And usually people get me wrong. But John, I wanted to ask you, what does the rest of the world think about this? What do you as an Australian think about this? What is the foreigner's perspective on what's going on in the United States? Because I think we've heard plenty of wailing and gnashing of teeth from Americans bemoaning the current situation or saluting the current situation, depending on your political proclivities.
I'll help the audience out. You're a big RFK guy. I know that. Look, it's hard to know. I think Australia's not a great example because we've got all our eggs in one basket, and that is the US basket. So we kind of look on and think your politics is a bit extreme, a bit crazy, but cross our fingers that things will continue. I mean, America does have a remarkable ability to regenerate, to kind of, let some blood and cure itself in a way that other countries have, not been so successful at. So I think there's a bit of blind hope in Australia that you guys will be able to do that, and that Trump, not even Trump as a guy, but the populism we just talked about, that rising trend of economic, of nationalism, of all these kinds of isms, where I think we're going to hope that that's a passing trend. Elsewhere in the world, I think Europeans are just, boy, do they have confirmation bias on their priors about America. I do think that there is some serious. I think the cat will be. Well, to use a better metaphor, the toothpaste will be well and truly out of the tube if Trump gets reelected on things that we talked about, on tech, on globalization, on tariffs. I think the world will say at that point, okay, this isn't a flash in the pan. We got to prepare for a post-American global world. But if he doesn't win, maybe the world will just sort of go, okay, it really was an anomaly, and maybe there's some elements of globalization that can be saved around the margins.
There you have it.
All right, folks, thanks so much for joining us again. We ran a little long today, but I think it was a big week which needed extra discussion. So tune back in next week. We will cover whatever happens next week. And you know what? I'm not even going to try to predict what happens between now and next week. So we'll keep you on tenterhooks. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jacob.
Cheers.